What's up, dweebs? I'm Brad Fry, Emmy Award-winning composer, Grammy Award-winning composer. What's the other awards? Oscar Award-winning composer, Razzie Award-winning composer, and also, believe it or not, Pornhub Music Award-winning composer. Now, of course, none of that's true. But I did win an award once at a film scoring thing that basically meant nothing. And I also met this kid named Lawson, who was like, I think he was 15 years old at the time. This was like a couple of years ago. And he also won a film scoring award. And I thought, wow, this kid's 15 years old and he's winning a film scoring award. That's pretty cool. And the cool thing about Lawson, the 15-year-old, is that now, I think he's 16 years old. So kudos to Lawson for being 16 years old, and I know that he watches my videos, which is great. With that being said, let's do the dang thing, huh?
Here's a question. Here's an answer. Oh, it's a bit of a dodgy question here. Question. Here's an answer. Answer. Leave it as a question with another question. Bit of a dodgy question. Dodgy question. Here's a question. Question. Here's an answer. Answer. Leave it as a question with another question. Bit of a dodgy question. Dodgy question. Yeah.
Now, okay. Now, given that spooky season is upon us, and in fact may already have passed by the time this goes up, it's possible that Halloween has already happened, and if that's the case, hey, so what, you know? Never a wrong time for a good spookin', I always say. And scary music is something that's rarely discussed with any sort of useful detail, so hopefully we can accomplish that today. So what is scary music? What are some examples of scary music? And how can we look at it and analyze it in such a way that as composers we can more effectively or more easily write scary music? And if you're not a composer, if you're just here to try to understand and appreciate it more for whatever reason, then hopefully we can help with that too. So let's tackle the first question first, since it's the easiest, kind of. What is scary music? Scary music is music that makes you scared. Cool. Now there's a problem with this definition. First of all, using the thing you're defining in the definition. Yeah, I know. Cool. Okay. Second problem, first a real problem. People are scared by different things. What is scary to one person might not be scary to another. The second problem is that there hasn't been any real concrete scientific study on any of this, probably in part due to its subjectivity. Right? There's no spooks per note measurement that we can use to talk about music. There have been some studies, which I'm aware of, which suggest that really low sounds and really high sounds will elicit some sort of primal fight or flight response, probably as a result of some evolutionary way of avoiding certain types of animals when living out in the wild. But I don't believe any of those studies really approached it from a musical angle. And of course, not all low notes and not all high notes will elicit that same evolutionary response. And so the application of those ideas are, in our musical context, quite limited. So just know that for a lot of this, I'm kind of talking out of my ass and making stuff up as we go along, just in an attempt to understand this. And so just take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, okay? Let's watch a clip first from The Shining, and then I'll talk some more.
Come and play with us. Come and play with us, Danny. Forever and ever and ever.
Now that we're all properly spooked, just so we have some footing in this kind of, again, subjective and abstract landscape, and so that you at least understand where I'm coming from with this, even if you disagree, what is most effectively scary to me is ambiguity. If we don't know what a creature or a monster or a character looks like, if we don't know where it comes from, what its motivations are, where it is at any given time, then that's scarier to me than when we do know all of those things. Voldemort, for example, is not really a scary character to me, okay? Because we know a lot about him, especially later on in the books. I don't particularly like the dude, right? But he's not scary to me. And to be fair, I don't think he's really supposed to be. This clip from The Shining is scary to me because my first questions when watching it are, why is this kid riding around in a tricycle? Okay, where is he going on the tricycle? What is going to be around the corner as he's riding? What is going to happen? You know, this whole the hotel location that they're at is kind of shrouded in mystery, right? And when he turns the corner and he sees these twin girls, my questions then become, who are these twin girls? Why are they standing in the middle of the hallway? Why are they eerily syncing up with each other? Why do they want Danny to play with them forever? What's with the quick shots of the bloody corpses? You understand what I'm saying? We really don't know anything about what's happening. And the thing about the music is that it's not helping us at all. Okay? There's no foundation in the music for us to grab onto either. You know, what key is it in? What's the time signature? It's, you know, when you listen to it, it's complete chaos. And that brings me to my next point, which is one of the fundamental ways with which I tend to look at and think about film music, and with which I've never talked about before or written in any of the analyses that you'll see on this channel, at least up until this point, is through the lens of chaos and order. Now, I don't think I need to spend a lot of time explaining this, because when I think when I say chaos and order, that most of you already have a good intuition about what that means. So just as a quick example, if you are someone who has a strict schedule that you keep to, You have an alarm clock that you set to the same time every day. You go to work at the same time every day. You clean your apartment, all the time. You, I don't know, you count calories. You are someone whose life is generally in, almost extreme order. Okay. On the flip side, if you're someone who, whose schedule is kind of always up in the air, you're showing up late to things, you're not very reliable, your apartment is a mess, you maybe don't have a stable job or stable relationships, you are someone whose life is in pretty near complete chaos, okay? And at any point in time, you're somewhere on that scale. Either you're in complete order, complete chaos, or somewhere in between, okay? You see this idea in film as well, given that it's a representation of real life usually. So some quick examples of how this can happen. You might see a camera on a tripod. This is a very subtle way of conveying order, okay? It sounds stupid, and in fact, in most cases, probably the director isn't even thinking about it like that. But contrast that with a camera, with a shaky cam in an intense fight scene. The camera's moving, it's just trying to follow the action, but there's no, it's not smooth, it's hard for us to follow sometimes. Another way that this can happen is through lighting. A character who is, in darkness may suggest that character is a bit ambiguous with their intentions, versus a scene which is completely well lit, which is, comfortable for us to look at. You also see this idea manifested in the music which accompanies these films as well, in many different ways, and this is sort of the crux of my point now. So in music, you have all of these different elements which combine together to make something that we hopefully like, okay? So we've got melody, harmony, rhythm, timbre, right? All of these different elements come together. And chaos and order can kind of map itself to those individual elements in some way, at least the way I see it. So I'm going to walk you through some of this now. So for melody, let's look at intervals, since that's all melodies really are. They're a series of intervals. On one hand, we've got the major second, the perfect fourth, the perfect fifth. Okay, these are all pretty pleasing intervals to listen to, and we can easily contextualize them. Contrast that with intervals like the tritone and the minor ninth, both intervals which are very much not pleasing to listen to, and harder to imagine a context or where they might lead. Okay, a bit of a loose interpretation for this one, but melody alone, it doesn't give us a whole lot to work with. For harmonies, on one end, we've got the order belonging to the major chord, okay? Even the minor chord. We're all familiar with these chords. We've all heard songs which incorporate these chords. We can easily contextualize them and imagine what might come next, even if subconsciously. Maybe somewhere in the middle, we've got a major 7 sharp 11 chord. Okay, harder to comprehend, but not really, right? Then the closer we get towards chaos, maybe we have some funky polychord like an F sharp minor major 7 chord with a G minor underneath and a C sharp in the bass. I don't know. I'm making it up, okay? Definitely harder to comprehend, I think. Then in complete chaos, on the other side, we've just got a half-step cluster. A bunch of half steps shoved together. Now, why? My question to you would be, what is the root of a half-step cluster? Right? How do you contextualize that within a key? You understand what I'm saying? Like, where does that go? It's complete chaos. Same goes for keys, and I'll try to speed through the rest of these. On one hand, you've got the major scale and the minor scale as structures which we're all familiar with, and on the other hand, you've got things like the diminished scale and the chromatic scale. Much harder to imagine where, home base is there, so to speak. For rhythm, any kind of repetitive 4/4 beat will immediately set you in order. It's something we're all generally very familiar with, and also any consistent measured subdivision of the beats will do the same thing. For chaos, anything inconsistent will do, or any unmeasured rhythm, such as the unmeasured tremolo, where you're just trying to play as fast as possible with no regard for the beat subdivisions. And for timbre, playing instruments generally will provide some order to the composition. So just simply playing a string instrument with a bow or blowing air into a horn. I mean, it sounds stupid, but we all know how that works. We're all familiar with it. If you want to convey chaos, you can move into the more extended techniques, such as solfaticello, glissandi, and pizzicato for strings, and your different types of mutes for the brass instruments. Now, all this is great, and I mean, maybe putting all of this together is how we get our spooks per note measurement, right? I mean, we can kind of make it up. But I want to at least put this into practice and show you how all of this comes together on a score. So if we go back to the Penderecki example from The Shining, and by the way, Penderecki is a great composer to study if you want to get into scary music. His music is used a lot in horror films, and a lot of film composers today will borrow from the timbres and techniques that he was experimenting with. So here's the score to the excerpt of The Shining that we watched earlier when Danny's riding on the tricycle. And if you look here, we've got very strange notations. So part of Penderecki's whole thing was like, very avant-garde, but even to the point of saying, let's throw out the kind of conventional notational standards and do some wacky stuff. And so what you see here is, sometimes you'll see these arrows saying like, play the highest note that you can. And so that might vary across instruments or players even. And so you get you kind of throw it up to chance. You're kind of going to get a cluster of notes there. You'll notice, for example, we've got these glissandis happening in the strings, basically kind of moving outwards into a half-step cluster, probably. I mean, I'm just looking through the score. I mean, I can't see everything at once, of course, but we've got these varying levels of vibrato that Penderecki is asking for here. These wavy lines above the staff, I believe, are referring to the motion of the vibrato. You'll notice also that the dynamic markings are not really correlating with each other. When one instrument's quieting down, another is getting louder. Let's keep going here. And also, I mean, the thing is, we have a time signature here, but also, I mean, there are musical events which are happening which are not really correlating like with the beginning of a bar. I mean, there's not like a definite pulse where things are coming in and leaving. And where I know that there's these, so these runs in the woodwinds are pretty bizarre too. And I mean, if you look here, it's not like these are doubling each other in octaves. They're all playing all of these different notes. And the point is, we could sit here and like just look at this little section right here with this run in the woodwinds and try to dissect it and say, well, what's each instrument doing and what's the difference between them, and is there a pattern here, and how can we try to understand it via some structure? And the thing is, I really think we would be wasting our time. Like, I don't think it's the point is that there's some kind of structure or math behind this. It's that the outcome is complete chaos, and it's not anything nice and traditional sounding. You understand what I'm saying? And so all of this, kind of ties into this idea of chaos. There's nothing about this which is remotely, which could be remotely attributed to kind of the standard things that we're used to hearing with an orchestra. Now, I want to talk about two more things quickly before we move on, just to give you something to think about. So, first of all, another effective way of scoring scary scenes with the intent of making them more scary is to simply not write any music. And I think this is kind of an underappreciated way of doing it. I think sometimes the absence of music really kind of pulls the rug out from under the audience and says, you're on your own now, right? Like, it's really music taken to the chaotic extreme, right? Like, what's the tempo of the piece when nothing's playing? What's the key? So it kind of leaves the audience on their own to figure things out. And so that's something to consider, I think. Now, you're not going to get any scary music out of that because you're not going to get any music, but something to think about, right? The other thing I want to mention is that there are probably some examples of scenes which are scored using some of the techniques that might fall under order. I think a simple nursery rhyme playing under a scary scene or something. It's important, though, to differentiate first between like orderly music simply being in a horror film and orderly music actually underscoring a scary scene and adding to the horror in some way. So, for example, the tubular bells in the beginning of The Exorcist is not scary music to me. And the scene that's accompanying is not scary either. The woman's she's just walking through the town. Like, I mean, there's nothing happening. I think that piece often gets associated with being horror only because it's in a movie, which is generally scary, and not because the piece itself is scary or because the context the piece was in is scary. I hope that makes sense. I would tread carefully here. Is all I'm saying, because I don't find that it's consistently effective to go this route with the music. And in fact, I think you run the danger of being kind of campy when you start pulling out the detuned music box at this stage in the game and start playing nursery rhymes. Or like having a little kid sing a cute little song, but like a creepy kid, So anyway, that's all I have to say about that. Just thought some of you might be interested in hearing that. Let me know what your thoughts are on all of this, and also, what are some of your favorite horror scores? I've been listening to a lot of them lately, and it's kind of been driving me crazy, but also I'm already crazy. Let's take a look now at some music from Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban. This is a cue which was not used in the film, but is in fact on the soundtrack. So some of you have still probably heard it before. In the score, the cue is called Bats Extension. And that's why I chose it today, because it's called Bats. And everyone knows bats are Halloween animals. Now I'll play you two versions of the scene with the music. The first is the original music, which was not used in the final cut of the film, which we will analyze further. And the second is the revision of the cue that ended up in the film. So here we go. Here's the first one. Okay, so that was, again, not used in the final cut of the film. And this version was revised and is the version that you hear in the film.
At least someone's enjoying himself.
Yeah. Hermione.
Yeah?
Before.
So, first of all, very noticeable difference between those two versions of the cue. The first of which has a lot more movement to it and is, like, frankly, very bizarre. And does feel out of place. Okay, the second version, the revised version, much more relaxed, much more tonal. You know, it's very calm and subtle. And I have to say, and I'm a huge John Williams fan. Okay, but no matter who you are, I guess sometimes you miss the mark. And I think this was honestly a case of John missing the mark. And that's okay, because is it still executed brilliantly and orchestrated well? And is it interesting to listen to? Yes, as is most John Williams music. But just given the context of the scene, I think he just missed it. And that's okay. Now, I actually want to look more at the first one because it's more interesting and it's bizarre, and I kind of just want to peel it apart and see what it is. But also just wanted to point out, hey, you can't always win. Now, the other thing that I want to do, if you're watching this whole video, because I'll probably clip this, if you've watched me just talking about chaos and order, I'm going to bring it up again just now. So if you think about the context of this scene in the film and what's happening, Harry and Hermione are just, they're watching things happen, and they already know what's going to happen. Like, they're watching themselves do things that they already did. So, one, they're not in any immediate danger, not yet. Not at this stage in the film. And, like, they know, okay, for the next, like, hour, we just have to sit here and watch things happen, which we've already seen happen. And so what I think of when I see that is, this is order. Okay? And if you think about the first version of the cue, it's very bizarre. There's a lot of movement, and it's strange to listen to, and the way that I would characterize it is as chaos. And so there's a bit of a mismatch there. And in fact, the second version of the cue, the revised version, much more subtle, much more what we might expect, and happens to fit the scene a little more appropriately, I think. But look, whatever, you know, we can't be right all the time, even if our name is John Williams. But with all that being said, the cue is still really great, and so I'm going to open it up now. I did a little reduction of it for you, and just want to do a quickie analysis of it because I think it's pretty interesting. So first thing we see here is a very quick descending scale in the violins and the violas, harmonized in seconds. How about that? Usually we see scales like this harmonized in octaves. Maybe we see them harmonized in thirds, but seconds, kind of weird. Again, I'm playing into the whole bizarre, chaotic feel of it. And I mean, we could look at this further. I'm kind of doing a quick 3-second analysis of the scale. It looks like it's maybe a D major kind of raised fourth thing going on there. That's Lydian, you idiot. Yeah. Not sure. Looks like there's some chromatic things. It doesn't matter. the cool thing is that it's harmonized in seconds. And when I say seconds, by the way, I mean, if you look at the violas, they're an octave down, so they're a ninth, but really it's all seconds. And there's also kind of an interesting rhythmic thing going on here too, where, first we have a septuplet, then we have a sextuplet, and then we have a quintuplet. And so we're sort of decreasing the amount of notes that we're shoving into the beat. So it has this effect of slowing down over time, which is kind of neat. And underneath all that, we have a D5, basically, and the Chilean basses and one horn. And then we have this quick little melodic phrase by the oboe, which is on the flat 6 to the 5th to the sharp 4th, and that's a very typical little melodic idea that you might find in the Harry Potter scores that John Williams does. The whole thing's kind of centered around that. And then starts to get pretty interesting because we've got these major chords coming in with the flutes and the celeste. And we're going to come to this in a second, but what I want to point out is that from this D5, we're kind of just adding to the harmonic content of the accompaniment. So from the D5, we now have, with these trills here, it looks like a D major, like flat 6, or you could think of it as an augmented if you want. Played by violins and violas, unmeasured tremolo, again, chaos. I'm going to keep saying it. You're going to hate me for it. And also, we have a piano and harp arpeggio outlining the chord, which is sort of inconsistently subdividing the beat. So we're going from an 8th note triplet to 16th note quintuplet, back to the 8th note triplet, and so on. And so we have this uneven distribution of notes. Also playing into chaos. And then over top of this whole bed of D major accompaniment, we have, check this out, and then these major chords played by the flutes and celeste, a D flat major chord to an E flat major chord. So D flat being a half step below D, E flat being a half step above D. No real tonal relation to D. Okay, if we're considering that we're in the key of D, which I guess we're really not, those chords they're not following it. And we go from that to a C major, so now a whole step below D, back to D flat, then to E flat, D flat, so on. We get that same melodic idea again by the oboe. And then we go back to these weird major chords. D flat to D major, back to D flat, back to D, then to E flat. So really dancing around that D. Dancing around that D, huh? Is that what we're doing? So sexual. And also notice kind of a bizarre rhythmic thing happening here where we've got these 8th note triplets switching then from the triplet subdivision to just the normal straight 8th note subdivision. Something John likes to do a lot. And again, all of that's happening over this augmented, unmeasured tremolo pad and the uneven harp and piano arpeggios. So very bizarre, but also very cool, very hip, as the jazz cats might say, as John himself may say. And yeah, that's all I really wanted to do, is I just wanted to take a quick look at that cue. So let me know what you think about that, and what you think about this cue versus the revised version of the cue. And if you think the other one is more appropriate, do let me know. I want to end the episode today by talking about the new Joker soundtrack by, I'm going to try to pronounce her name right. I'm probably going to mess it up, but I did try to look it up so that I would pronounce it right. So I'm making a honest attempt, but by Hildur Guthnadottir. I hope I did that right. Everyone's been talking about this film lately, as well as the soundtrack, which has been getting a lot of praise, and rightfully so, I think. And so I figured I might throw my 2 cents into the well here, and also maybe we can get a good discussion going on here, although maybe that's wishful thinking for a YouTube video. I have seen the film twice now in theaters, and I've listened to the soundtrack on Apple Music from front to back once. So just keep in mind that my review is stemming from just that, and only that. 2 viewings and 1 listen through of the soundtrack. And one of those viewings was me just trying to, enjoy the film like a normal human being without paying a lot of attention to the music, unless it demanded it, I guess. So the soundtrack is primarily built on this solo cello sound, which is quite raw and broken sounding. It's being played in a way which I don't know if it's like sol ponticello or what the exact technique is. I haven't read anything about it, but it's not the normal way that you would play the cello. Okay. And I think the decision to craft the score in such a way that this is the focus was a good decision and an appropriate decision. The main focus of the film is on this character, the Joker, who is a very broken and disturbed person. It's an intimate character study of this character. And so I think it made sense for the score to reflect that, in that we're focusing on this one instrument in a very intimate way. The cues throughout the opening sequence were great. They set the stage well, I think. It had a very oppressive feeling to it. It felt like there was a huge weight on your shoulder from the beginning. And I loved that. And I loved the sequence in the bathroom when the Joker is dancing to the cello music. From what I understand, a lot of the music was composed ahead of time, which is not typical, but does allow for this kind of choreography to happen. So I thought that was great. After my first viewing, I felt like the score didn't develop as much as it could have, given the immense development that the character of the Joker undergoes. And this is a problem that I generally have with a lot of modern scores now. But again, that was only after my first viewing, and at that time I wasn't paying a lot of attention to the music. So I thought, well, whatever. It's not a big deal. I'll just give it another shot and actually pay more attention. And after the second viewing, and with paying a little more attention to the music, I get it. Okay, it's more, you might call it vertical development. Okay, where we're basically adding instruments into the mix. And that's fine. So where we have just the cello in the beginning, at some point we start to add the full string orchestra, then the brass, then the percussion, until the full orchestra is playing as the Joker fully becomes the Joker at the end. The orchestra is sort of, in a way, giving him his power, or at least reflecting his confidence level in a way. So that's great. My main issue with the score, my main criticism, and it's a bit of a nitpick, and certainly doesn't take away from my enjoyment of it, and in fact probably has nothing to do with the decision made by the composer. It's probably more of a director or a producer's type of deal. But I did feel like sometimes the music didn't need to be there. Okay, not because it was bad, There were just times when the music would come in for about a minute and then stop, like in the middle of a tense scene. And it felt like its only job was to say, hey, remember, this is supposed to be uncomfortable, when I don't think that reminder was really necessary. If you want to make a raw, intimate, and uncomfortable film, which it seems like that's what they were after, then I wish they would have just committed to that, and committed to it in the musical sense. So it seems like maybe the director or the producers weren't confident enough in it and decided to confide more so in the music than I felt was necessary. Now, it's just my opinion, okay? And again, very small criticism. I think overall it's brilliant. All of that aside, I really enjoyed it. I think Hilder did a great job with it, and curious to hear what your thoughts are on the soundtrack. That's going to do it for today, folks. Make sure you like and subscribe, and also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and all that fun stuff. I'll try not to take 6 months to make the next video, but until next time, thanks for watching, you dweebs. Kisses.
Hi, this is Tom, Junkie XL, and welcome to Studio Time with Junkie XL. Now we have a very, 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 very special episode, and please follow me for this special episode. Today, ladies and gentlemen, we have kitchen time with Junkie XL, and we're gonna make spaghetti carbonara. And here we go. It's a very simple recipe, but you have to do it right. If you don't do it right, it's gonna be awful. If you do it right, it's a dish from God. So, let's start with the white wine. Take a little sip. And here we go. These are the ingredients